Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Sarah Smith, and you're listening to Raw Intentions. Hello. So excited to be joining you again, coming live from Denver, Colorado. We're recording lots of episodes this week, and today was really fun because we did Raw Intentions, did a podcast swap with another local podcast who also happens to be our guest for today. So sit tight. I will tell you all about them. But before we get into that, obviously, I have to talk about myself. Give you my little elevator pitch just in case this is your first time listening. So like I said in the intro, my name is Sarah Smith, Sarah with an H, Smith with a Y. I am 29 years old from Madison, Alabama, and currently living in Breckenridge, Colorado. I went to Auburn University and graduated with a double major in rehab disability studies and Spanish. My plans were to go to grad school for bilingual occupational therapy. Of course, nothing ever goes to plan. I was waitressing at Texas Roadhouse, wasn't quite paying the bills, so I started making handmade jewelry for myself, for my friends. And what started as just me making necklaces out of my college apartment snowballed and turned into a full-blown brand business, my baby, my firstborn child. And it's still my full-time job to this day. So it's called Raw and Rebellious. It's at raw_rebellious on Instagram. Definitely check us out if you don't follow us already. And yeah, we don't actually do jewelry anymore. I did that for a really long time. We've kind of pivoted, and I do clothing, hats, prints, shoes, events, meetups, bar crawls, collabs, all kinds of things. We're kind of all over the map and ever evolving. But my favorite part by far is our community. We've cultivated such an incredible group of women and now men, which is kind of new to me because I was just jewelry for so long. And that's my favorite part, getting to chat via DMs, getting to meet y'all at pop-ups and at events. And that's what led me to start this podcast, Raw Intentions, with the intention of just creating a lifeline between us and our incredible community and creating connection and having meaningful conversations. Obviously, I love hearing myself talk or I wouldn't have a podcast. So yes, there are solo episodes, but my favorite part by far are the conversations I get to have with other people, either friends that I have in my personal life that I get to bring on, more like drag on onto the mic, and also people that I admire from afar that I get to collaborate with and create new friendships and meaningful conversations with, which was absolutely the case with today's guests. Today, we've got Sam and Elliot Archuleta. They are a powerhouse. They are a married couple. They're business partners. They're podcasters. They have the podcast Something More Human, which I did an episode for theirs as well. And holy shit, talk about meaningful conversations. I went into this interview like I always do, where I, do my research, which means I just essentially stalk the shit out of my guests and come up with questions that we may or may not go over. We went in so many different directions here, and the conversations were so vulnerable. They were so raw. And I am just so happy to have gotten to know Sam and Elliot, to get to call them friends. I learned so much about relationships, about marriage, about growing and finding yourself throughout your 20s. We talked about our faults. We talked about our insecurities and how to move through that. We discussed starting a podcast and what that looks like, and the things that we love about phones and the things that we hate that really restrict us, the lack of community we all came out of the pandemic feeling, and how that's affected us still, and what they're trying to do to not only change that for other people, but also to cure that lack of community within themselves. I think any of the conversations we had are incredibly applicable to anyone listening, whether you're feeling lost, whether you're going through change, having some growing pains. We cover it all. So I'm really excited to welcome Sam and Elliot to Raw Intentions, and I hope you learn as much as I did. And welcome to my podcast that I'm recording in your studio.
Yeah,
Yay!
so cool.
Because we're doing a podcast swap. We've had lots of technical difficulties, and I've learned lots of technical things from y'all, especially you. Well, actually, both of you guys. No, that's what's cool. You guys both have your own strengths in this. Like, it works very well because you each have this very niche knowledge about what you're doing, which I love. Sure. Mm-hmm. It makes a great partnership.
And we'd love to help. Like, if there's seriously anything you need, if you're recording a podcast, and you're like, I'm not sure what the setting is or what I should do, just hit us up, dude.
Thank you.
I'm not saying we know everything, but if you need help, we're happy to help, because we're spending so much time just trying to get all the little things right. The mic setup and the audio and settings and the lighting. And so, we're happy to help.
Well, and that's what I like about what you guys have going. And it's really inspiring to me because, like we were just saying, with my podcast, I struggle with the time aspect where it's not my full-time job and I have so many other ventures that I'm working on constantly that sometimes I find that I put less perfectionism into my podcast because it's almost like I don't have as much left, but I care about it so much. And as soon as I'm like talking to you guys, I get in my flow state where I'm like interviewing and I'm curious and I'm getting to, create these intentional connections and conversations with new people. But I struggle with like the time and the money investment of it where it's like, okay, how can I make this make sense if I'm not making any money off of it, but I want to monetize it at some point? I need to treat it like I'm making money off of it. And that's what you guys are doing. I mean, you have such an amazing setup. And I love that you're already talking about like the live podcasts and all those things, because I think it's the same with like manifesting, like act like you already have it. Like
For
you're
sure.
just
Amen.
hitting the ground running. And I love that.
I feel like though, I love like the idea of don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So even if you're showing up with like 60% in the tank, but you're like, I want to do this because of the community and because of the conversations.
Right.
And like the only way, in my opinion, to like learn fast and do big stuff is to fail fast. So if you're like, okay, I cannot do an episode if I'm at 40%, but I can at 60%. And then I get in the flow state and I know that if I have 30 minutes of prep or like if we get lunch with our guests beforehand, then I'm in the zone. And like you wouldn't know that unless you did an episode at 40% and didn't like it.
Right.
You know?
Can I tell a really quick story?
Of course. You can tell as many stories as you want.
So that's Sam. Like Sam is the epitome of like fail fast and fail often.
Okay.
And I'm like haven't done as much as I want in my life because I'm like it has to be perfect or I don't want to do it.
Interesting.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But one thing Sam said when we first started, you went to BBD, and I think that's where you got it from. Or we could just say you got it from yourself.
Yeah, it's funny. I wish you would stop saying the acronym on podcasts. I joined this business.
Of what?
Business by BBD.
I joined.
Business by Design.
Yeah, it's called Business by Design, and he shortens the acronym to BBD.
Sorry.
But without context, people are like, what even the fuck are you talking
Yeah, I was
about?
like, hello? Do you guys have your own language?
So Sam said in the very beginning, she's like, if I told you that episode 20 was the episode that we really started figuring things out and, we really got the ball rolling, how fast would you fail through the first 19 episodes? And then episode 22 was the episode that we had Ben Higgins on.
Right.
Which is like one of our, biggest. And then the next episode we have Dan Harris.
Right.
And I just think that's fascinating that like Sam said, how fast would you fail through the first 19? And I never really thought about it like that. And I think most would probably say as soon as possible.
Right. Like, let's start.
Right. And had I not, obviously this podcast would not be here without you, but my life would not be where it is without you, because that is sort of your motto. You're like, yeah, well, we don't have it all figured out. Like we don't know, all of these, tips and tricks for audio and for color grading and for exporting and all these things, but like we're learning and you just have to go as you learn as you go. And like with the Ben Higgins episode, Sam didn't even ask me. She was just like, she booked it, didn't even tell me. But knowing me, I would have been like, oh, I really want to get better on camera first. And I want to get better at scripting and I want to get better at research. That didn't happen. It was sort of like, okay, we have to level up. We don't have a choice but to level up or be embarrassed by Ben.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's such a simple motto, but it's like, that's how I want to live my life always. Like just figure it out now, fail now, and you learn from your failure. And then like, you'll be successful eventually. So
I love that. And yeah, how quick would you fail? That's such a great way to put it into perspective, because I mean, any entrepreneur you talk to and you ask for business advice or things that they would say or tell their, younger self before they started the business was like, just start sooner. Like do it now, because so many people have the same idea, but it's about actually doing something with it. And the sooner you start, the sooner you can get better. I mean, I listened to my first episodes versus my episodes now, and it's like night and day. And if I wasn't embarrassed by the quality, then I'm not growing.
Exactly.
Right? If it was still the exact same. So I think that's such a good thing to remember, as well as like, to your point, we were talking about that earlier, like shooting your shot. You never know who is going to say yes. The worst someone could say is no, which is kind of a blanket statement for so many things. But yeah, Ben Higgins, and then Dan Harris, who's on the Today Show, you said? He was
an anchor on Good Morning America.
Good Morning America.
And Nightline, yeah.
Yeah. And like, that's so sick. And the fact that you said yes, that's another really great motto for business or for anything. You say yes, and then you figure it out.
Exactly.
Because sometimes it's like, you got to have that fire under your ass and you're like, okay, well, we were going to upgrade the equipment maybe in like 3 months. Let's just do it now.
Right.
Or whatever it is that you guys are planning on shifting and changing. So I think that's incredible.
Yeah. It's all you, man.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. It's perspective I'm learning. It's just like, so we're just stuck in our ways, and like to get perspective, like like words are so powerful to hear like a very simple phrase. I'm like, holy shit, like that's really, really powerful and also really easy to do. Like one of our episodes is called Failure is a Rite of Passage. And I'm like, that's true. Like you just have to fail. I'm like,
well, it's interesting, Sarah, you said like, if I'm not embarrassed by my early episodes, then I'm not learning and growing. I love Lori Harder, who's like a big person in the personal development field. She has had many failed brands, and she basically says embarrassment is the price of success, or like the price you pay for entry to your goals. And it's like, we're so scared, I think, of like being cringy or like looking bad or like what other people think and hold ourselves back. And like, how do we break out of that? Like, how do we stop caring what literal strangers think about us?
And what do you think the answer to that is? Like when people say like, oh, you got to stop caring what people think. What's your opinion?
This is an interesting question that we think about all the time. Elliot and I are really, really different, but the more that we do the podcast and like have a business together, the more I realize how complementary we are.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because we, I think, have different perspectives on this. I've never been a super self-conscious person. So for me, it's a little bit like, I said I'm going to do the thing, so I'm going to do the thing. And like very black and white and type A.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting, sad by the people leaving bad reviews about my voice on Apple. I'm just going to stop reading them as often because I like, there's nothing else that I can do besides consume it or don't consume it. So like, I've switched the switch.
Okay.
Or like this person made me feel embarrassed and like wasn't great. I won't hang out with them again.
Okay.
Like it's a little bit more black and white for me, and the way that I think about people perceiving me. And I think about like when you have a group photo and you go to show someone the group photo, nobody's looking at you. They're going to zoom in on themselves.
Right.
So just reminding myself that I am the center of my own world and everybody else is the center of their own world.
I would say that hurt people hurt people. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like trying to understand, even though it's very difficult, especially for me, because I'm way more self-conscious or more prone to letting like words from other people affect me, But generally, like if someone's leaving a bad review, like, or whatever in life, they're projecting. Do you know what I mean? So I think not caring what people think is very difficult to do, but also like on the podcast when Anna was talking to you, it's like what we were just saying, like no one, you see certain like blemishes in yourself. But like no one else really does, or like people, at least the people that really love you, don't really care. And if they notice, they might just notice because they're observing, because they're human beings, because they have eyes and a brain. But like, they're not thinking about it the way that you are, and that's very difficult for me to like take to heart, because I'm the worst at that. And that's again where you and I are so like opposites. It's like crazy in almost every single way. You and I just
yin and yang.
So yeah. I would say if we cared what people thought all the time, I think it's like the enemy of creativity, truly. I think it puts you in like a really small box when you care so much about what people think. And so we could do a better job. I think like those reviews do get to me, honestly, they do, because it's somebody talking shit.
Yeah.
Which is, but anyway, I think that we do a pretty good job at doing what we want to do and how we want to do it, so.
Yeah, I also maybe think about like being grounded in your intention. Like when I see the podcast is really like our entire life right now, which is why we keep using it as examples. But like when we get bad reviews, or like people on TikTok are actually quite mean. So like people
post anymore.
People say, well, I'm going to start posting again, but people like will just say really out of pocket stuff. And I'm like, okay, what was my intention? Like, okay, our intention with the podcast, or our intention with the way that we're engaging with the world is very pure and like good-hearted, and like we're seeking to build community and like inspire. So if we're faltering in our intention, then I can start to like lose and like crack the foundation.
Okay.
But if I know that I'm bringing my best self, I'm doing my best, and like that's the most I can give, then like really what is someone else going to say about that?
Totally.
That will get to you. I don't know if that's coherent, but
no, it is. And it's when you think about your intention like that and you bring it back, it's like, okay, if someone's leaving a hateful comment about the inflection of your voice, it's like, who cares? Like, what are we here to do, right? Have these conversations, be curious about who's in front of me, like create these connections, these friendships, whatever it is that you have that goal with that podcast. But if someone's leaving a comment and they're like, you talk over your guests and you don't listen. Okay, well, like that sucks to read, but my intention is the opposite of that. So let me take that to heart, because I've heard other podcasts talk about that with husband and wives, or, co-hosts where they are getting comments that like one of the hosts always talks over the other host or something like that, and if that's a consistent thing, it's like, okay, well, I can care about that because maybe they're just calling something out that I do need to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And also to your point, not caring what people think is really hard. And I think that's such a hot button thing of on social media, you can seem one way or the other. We all know it's a highlight reel. We all know that. And I get questions about that all the time because I'll post things that maybe seem more out there, off the cuff, you know, whatever that is. And people ask me like, oh, like, how do you let go of that? How do you not care? And I think it's such a practice. And you kind of touched on this. It's doesn't really come naturally for anyone. You know, we all have an ego. We all perceive the world differently and perceive others in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the older you get, the more you realize that everyone's just so busy thinking about themselves that they're not really perceiving you as much as you think or really thinking about you at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing, like, you know, everyone's left a party and like maybe made a weird comment or like said a weird joke or saw their ex or something and you're feeling
Mhm.
weird about it when you go home. But then if you think for a second, can you remember anything that anyone else said like that?
Mhm.
Like, are you rolling in your mind over and over again, like a sentence or a story or a comment that anyone else made in a negative way? No, you've never done that
Mhm.
unless it's like obscenely racist or horrible or something that's
Right.
like super negative. So I always try to think about that too, is like, I'm rolling over this thing that I did in my mind. I'm not thinking about anyone else when I'm obsessing over this thing either. So I think it comes back to choosing to not read those reviews, choosing to not let it get to you. And it's
Mhm.
just a choice. And it's not a forever thing. You just have to continuously decide to choose yourself and
Mhm.
kind of be the center of your own world, like you said.
I'm also hearing you say like intentional engagement with your community.
Mm.
Like there's a spectrum, I think, and one end of the spectrum is put yourself in a silo where you're not accepting feedback. You're like,
Okay.
I don't give a fuck what anybody thinks,
Right.
and I'm also not open to feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side is caring so much that you're stifling yourself.
Mm.
But there's that middle ground, which is, what am I here to do? Is there valuable feedback? How can I be open and honest with myself about that kind of feedback?
Okay.
And then how can I be secure with the type of feedback that's not like serving me and my mission,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
which is like a gray area, which
Yeah.
is like life is gray.
Right. Well, I mean, you guys just started this not long ago, so it's probably you're still finding your footing and figuring all that out.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But yeah, let's take it back a little bit. I'd love for you guys to introduce yourself
Mhm.
to our listeners and give your little elevator pitch and your podcast and all the things.
Doctor?
Doctor. I'm one half of Something More Human. My name is Elliot. You're my wife. I'm your husband.
You are my wife.
My life.
This is my
Why-
wife.
Well, why is that? It's like a tick.
That's so funny. You're really good at it too, damn.
Yeah,
That's
that
pretty
was
good. Both of you
great.
are good at it.
Actually,
yeah.
your sister's really good at
She
it.
is good at it. Have you seen that show? Have you watched that movie? Sorry.
Nope.
God damn.
I've never seen a movie
Or-
Totally.
Anyway, so
Is that your whole intro?
I'm gonna let you do the pitch. I mean, you're the best at it, and I think that you're like, I want you to learn to do it. I'm like, you're the spokesperson. You have a beautiful voice, and I need to learn to shut up and listen more. So like, I think that you're the spokesperson for the elevator pitch, man.
Okay. I'm Sam. I'm the
Okay.
second half of Something More Human. And we are a married couple. So we moved to a city that we didn't know anybody in
Mhm.
2023 and noticed that a lot of people were struggling with the same thing, which is, how do we make friends as adults? I'm in this new place. I want community, but like post pandemic, it feels like our social skills have atrophied.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I exercise that muscle and actually get back out there? So in November 2023, we launched Something More Human, which is
Okay.
our podcast and brand all around seeking to ask and answer questions about human connection. From entrepreneurship, we're married, we talk about love, to friendship, making friendship as adults. How do we make and maintain them? How do we deepen them when we're not in the same city or proximity?
Mm-hmm. And how old are y'all?
I'm 33.
I'm going to be 27 this month.
Okay.
I know your birthday's this month too. Happy early
it's this
birthday.
week.
20th, right?
30th.
30th. Oh,
Yeah.
Well, but it's
Wait,
on the
You thought I was
20th.
19?
no, 30th.
Oh.
September 20th, right? Is it not the 20th?
I was like, you thought I was 19? Seriously?
Yes, I also
yeah.
thought you were 19.
September 20th.
Okay, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Nice. How you're gonna be?
30.
I'm going to be 30.
Oh, you're gonna be 30. Oh, right.
This is a big birthday week.
Nice.
Uh-huh.
That's
which is
exciting.
So I've been doing a lot of reflecting on a lot of the things that you've been talking about.
Uh-huh.
And I think friendship is something that so many people struggle with, and connection. I mean, you think about community, which is a huge facet of my brand, and why I started this podcast was to have more of a lifeline to the community that I have through my business. And that's something that I've really noticed is people just crave that. They want to feel related to. I think that's why TikTok is so huge and things go
Mhm.
viral. It's because you have this niche thought that, or a private thing that you thought only you experienced. And then you see, oh, look, 5 million other people have also had this,
Mm-hmm.
niche experience. I'm not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being alone, especially from the pandemic, is something that really carried over like inside of us for so many people, feeling so isolated or feeling far away and forgetting how to create connection. So when you've started this podcast and, you know, from then to now, what do you feel like you've learned about that from your mission statement?
Oof, that's a really good question.
That's a really good question.
I think for me, I'm learning a lot about like individuation, meaning like it's very easy for me. We're married. We live together. We have a business together. It would be very easy for me to sort of let my world be just me and Elliot.
Totally.
And because we're kind of like this united front in marriage and in business, we also make a lot of friends that are friends of Sam and Elliot.
Right.
So I'm learning a lot about what does it mean to have community as a business owner? What does it mean to have community as an individual? What does it mean to have community with myself? And like, I'm the type of person that I don't love to do things alone, but being more kind of intentional and challenging myself to go to a coffee shop and read a book or like go have happy hour by myself. And what does that mean for me? And how does that look in the way that I relate to other people? So it's kind of like dancing on the edge of my comfort zone in new ways.
Okay. Why do you think you have that avoidance towards being alone?
I don't know. I'm very extroverted, so I've never really required a lot of alone time.
Okay.
Like I could do with like an hour a day with alone time previously.
Okay.
The older I get, the more I like alone time. I've also gotten super into reading lately.
Cool.
So part of it is that, I think. And I think maybe another part of it is just having never done it. So like the comfort zone circle of doing things alone was very small.
Okay.
Whereas now, the more I push myself, the more comfortable I am and the more space I have to do things within that comfort zone alone that I am happy to do. But I still have moments. Like we went to that, I was telling you before we started recording, we went to a podcast and Elliot was like, oh my God, the line is huge. Like jump out of the car and go get in line. And I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going without you. And he was like, no, Sam. He was like, seriously, like get out of the car and go get in line. And I was like, I will not be doing that.
It's okay.
So I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's cool. And I know your dog is so freaking cute.
She never.
I guess our conversation is boring. She's like, oh, I've heard this before.
Honestly, I was going to tell you, you should also think about bedtime story podcasts. Your voice is just like so like sultry and like sleepy and like meditative. I love it.
We have a friend who does one. We met her at Buzzsprout, or she works for Buzzsprout. We met her at Podfest in Orlando in January. She has a nighttime like stories for children podcast, and she does like really well.
No way.
Super cool. Yeah. And her voice is just as beautiful as yours and nice. Like sultry is a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very calming.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into that. But another little side hustle. I've gotten that and like phone sex operator. So I think I like the bedtime story one a little better.
Maybe this is like the point of intersection. Elliot's been told that he should be a phone sex operator.
That's really funny. By like a much older woman. And she's like, maybe next time. I was working for a beauty supply at the time and I had to call these salons all over the state in New Mexico. She was great. She was always just like busting my balls. But she was like, maybe next time when you call, we can practice. And I was like, oh my, and Jesus Christ, you're married.
Yeah.
So she was mostly messing around. But anyway, that's pretty funny.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that was funny. But
talk about shoot your shot.
I think for me, I like, what have I learned? And I'm trying to like probably forcibly make it about like other people and not me. But like you're asking me what I've learned. And I think like what I've learned about myself is that I'm a walking contradiction.
Okay.
He's also a Gemini.
Because
throwing that out there.
We're talking about like, we have phone-free events. Like we I don't know if we've talked to you about that, but podcast is one spoke, but we're like, if our podcast is all about, if our show is all about community, there's only so much community that you can do in a room like this, right? So like we want a physical space where we can congregate and come together, right? So like we also think that phones are a big part of why, there is a friendship crisis in America, or there is a lot of anxiety, and there's plenty of studies to back that that assertion. But I've been addicted to my phone for a really long time, and it's gotten in the way of my relationships, especially this one. So what I'm learning is that the podcast is making me be more honest about and forthcoming about the problems that I have and how they're getting in the way of the relationships that you and I are talking about building on the podcast, right? So I feel like there's this very interesting dichotomy of me. I'm not preaching. Like I don't want to say that we're preaching, but we're trying to inspire people. That's why we started the podcast. But then what we're preaching, I'm not practicing. Only until I feel like very recently. So I'm learning that about myself, and I'm also learning that I'm way more introverted than I realize, and that I constantly lament not having like the amount of friends I want or the type of community that I'm looking for but I also am really bad about like reaching out to friends and like asking them to hang out.
Mm.
Like I'm so wrapped up in this, and that means like going to the coffee shop and like editing. And that's even like, some separate like photo work or doing editing for the podcast or doing research or brainstorming. I love being alone. Like I really, really enjoy writing. I think writing is like my forte. I think it's like what I'm really good at. And so I could spend all day, every single day alone at the coffee shop and be totally fine.
Right.
And then at this other side of me, I'm like, oh, well, I'm so sad and I don't have the friends that I want and I still feel alone in Denver. And it's like, well, shit or get off the pot, dude.
Right.
Like, what is it that you want? And also trying to be a little more easy on myself and like really get to like the heart of the matter. Like, what is that about? Like, do I really want more friends? And if so, like, do I just have to be more intentional about reaching out? I think the answer is just yes. Do you know what I mean? So that's what I learned. I think I've learned that I have a lot of work to do on myself,
Which is so cool. I mean, I think awareness is the first step. And it sounds like you're going through the motions of recognizing these things about yourself, but also we're all so different. Like you're very introverted, you're very extroverted. I think I'm a little bit of both. I love alone time, but I also get really energized by being around other people. And so I'm curious, when you're kind of going through this, like, okay, I want more friends, I love being alone. What do you think it is that you're craving from having more friends in Denver, feeling more a part of a community here, that you're lacking with your alone time, if that makes sense? Because I know introverts get more energy from being alone. Isn't that the definition?
Sure. And I think I'm like you, because I think I am introverted, like the classic introvert extrovert.
Yeah.
Ambivert.
Yeah, sure. Because I get tons of energy from being, like, I realize that we've talked about this, like we do better as a couple when we spend more time with people. If we're alone a lot, like we just get on each other's nerves.
Totally.
And we don't do that well. And I think I don't know, life's a little bit of theater at the same time too. It's like when you're around other people, you want to perform. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean that like, I think I'm getting off topic here, but
no, there's no topic.
I think that's the thing too, is I'm 33 and I think that I've entered like the next era of my life, which is that like people that are my age are busier. Like I have a friend, Brian, who I realize like we don't hang out as much. And I think we both wish we did, but proximity plays a role in friendships. And so does time. And he lives like 30 minutes south, maybe not that far, maybe with traffic, but also has a 9 to 5. And so like my friend Ramon, like him and I can hang out more often because he is an entrepreneur. He has his own media agency. And so he's free at all these various times of the day, right? And we also live 5 minutes away from each other. So undoubtedly I hang out more with him than I do with Brian, so I think that's a part of it. I think proximity plays a big role. But I think the other thing that I'm realizing is that we've talked about we've been looking for, or I guess I won't speak for you, I've been looking for community. And I think that we were created literally to make our own, to build our own community. Like, I think that's why I've never felt like I fit in, because I'm always looking to insert myself into somebody else's. But inevitably when I do, it just feels like it's still not mine.
Right.
And maybe there's a little bit of ego there, I don't know, or selfishness, but it's like, no, I think that we're on the path to building our own. And that's really hard to do when we're spending so much time planning episodes and meeting new people, because we love, like, you're amazing. Like, we love to be friends with you, but you live in Breckenridge, right? And like,
so we're coming to Breckenridge.
Yeah. So you're coming to Breck.
We'd love to.
Of course.
I'm overtaking the conversation. I'm sorry, but
no, you're not at all.
We'll have people on and then we'll never see them again.
Right.
And that's hard. And I don't really care about that at the same time. I don't want to say I don't care, but how do we build like community in person? And then I worry that I want to build community on the internet. Like I want to have like this really beautiful, vibrant community, like tons of comments on YouTube and like a really healthy Patreon.
Of course.
And like, but then I'm also preaching like, oh, like our phones are in the way. So it's very interesting. What do you think? I'm going to stop talking. What do you think about all of that?
I think that you're hitting the nail on the head with, we are designed to create a community for people that feel like they're on the outside, or like, oh man, I like see all these people at the picnic with their friends in the park and like, I want that. Okay, what are you going to do about that? Like, how do my vision for something more human is like, we have this online community in Patreon or whatever it looks like, and people are like, hey, I'm in New York. Like, which one of you lives in New York?
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, I'm here. I work at this coffee shop. Like, come hang out when I'm
right.
off. And like, people are making connections through us. Without necessarily us having to be there, but like, because you like our message, you can connect, which I think is also like what you're doing with Ski Club and like all of the things that you're working on.
Right. No, totally. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do too, is like, okay, we have this commonality because we feel a part of this community, whether it's your podcast, my brand, what have you. And so we have some common ground that we can start with, and then maybe form a friendship just from having that commonality, which is the dream.
Totally.
Because it means you're connecting people on the basis that you kind of intended to, and your message is getting across to people.
Right.
Because they're listening and Yeah, I mean, it's hard too when you talk about like, I'm curious to hear more about the no phone thing because I couldn't agree more. And with some, like my whole job is on social media and I go through phases where I struggle with that with a job with social media where there's times where I would love to take total detoxes because I find that that's like the first thing that needs to go when I'm having a hard time, but it's also literally all of my work. And you talk about wanting to grow a community online and have all of the views and the Patreon and like the huge community, which of course that's what we all want. We want to spread as far as we can. And that's like the beauty of the internet and our phones and social media. But then it also gets in the way. So it's like, how the hell do we navigate that?
And I think that's kind of why we created the events themselves. But I think kind of what I worry about is like, if we get there, when we get there, because I know that we will, am I going to feel the same way? I think the answer is probably inevitably yes. And what that tells me is that you have to just be, I'm trying to like think of something novel, but you have to just be content in the moment. Like you have to be happy with where you are right now, because I really do think that we'll get there and I'll think the same thing. I'll go to the park and be like, oh, I wish I was part of that group. And I think it's just a complex, dude. Like I really think that I wish that I was like God and that I could experience everybody's experience at the same time.
You're
like
super meta.
I always just feel like I'm missing out. Like I always just feel like Sam's like, you're never here, dude. Like you're always like nostalgic, which is true. And but I always just wish, it's not even that I feel like a victim or that I feel like sad. It's almost that I just wish that I could get more.
Okay.
Like I just want to experience everything now. Like I want to know how the world feels like all at once, all the time. And I can't.
Interesting.
And I don't know how to like come to terms with that.
Okay.
I don't know how to wrap my head around that.
I don't either. I just look at something and I'm like, oh, that's like, I always use the word universe with you. And I'm like, oh, they're in their own little universe. Like, I wish I knew what was going on. Like what Spotify playlist is in their pocket right now? Like what are they, where do they come from? Like, where are they going? Like what are their names? Like, that's just like who I am. That's who I am.
Yeah.
You know?
I think though it's you're kind of talking about it in this way that's a little bit of a drawback, but I think the benefit of that is that you're so naturally curious, and that's what makes you such a great co-host. And like what makes you such a good co-founder of this brand is like the dynamic that you add to conversations and the natural curiosity that you have about other people is so genuine. And so it just makes people feel seen. And I think that like literally boiling it all down to like, why are we the way that we are as humans is like, we just are seeking to be seen.
No, I would agree with that. And and I feel like I have those thoughts too. It doesn't feel as overwhelming or like unattainable to me. It's more just like a curiosity where like when you're driving and you look over in traffic and you see, you know, a family in the car next to you, it's like, okay, yeah, where are they going? What are they talking about? What is their day like? What are their struggles? Like how old are their kids? Like random things like that, or the TikTok things where it's like, oh, what are you listening to right now? Like the kids walking on campus and stuff. Like I love that shit because I'm naturally very curious too, but it doesn't feel as much of like a like need to experience it. It's more just like, huh. And then my mind wanders and then I think about something else.
Sure.
So that, I mean, but that's so interesting. And it's cool because I mean, clearly you guys are also, I mean, we're all in our own little universes, right? And like y'all have this universe together, but you're also perceiving and experiencing this very similar life because you're experiencing life together in very different ways, which is really cool.
Yeah. Elliot has said in the past, like, because we're so different, like straight up, it was very hard for a very long time and it's still kind of hard. But there are moments where we're like, A, it's incredibly complimentary, especially from a business perspective. And B, Elliot has said it feels like we can live two full lives instead of like two half lives because we're so different. And even if we're experiencing the same thing, we might leave a talk at a conference or leave a networking event and get totally different things out of it and have different perspectives on like, how did it go? What could we do better? And that's really kind of a fun reflection that we do often, I think. Yeah.
I mean, thinking about like past relationships, like dating women that were like me, I thought that would work out. Like to date people that are like you, Sam and I are completely different and it works out. And I think that's why, you know, it's just interesting to think about. Like I said, you can only know what you know. And if the other person also kind of is just like you, then it's almost like you're only living like 1.25 lives.
Right.
But like her and I are so different. We disagree on so many things, but like we have this commitment to like, what is the word? I don't even know if you want to say grow, but just a commitment to like listen to each other, I guess. Maybe for lack of a better explanation.
Open to each other.
Yeah. And like, so then we do get to live like two whole lives in a way because we just see things so differently. And it is cool. You're right. Cause like we're experiencing the same thing together essentially. But like we'll take very different things from this conversation with you.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Or, yeah. So it's pretty cool.
No, yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about working together, living together, being married.
Oh
all the things.
Well, we have an interesting love story. We got engaged in 5 months,
Okay.
which is bananas. And then we got married a year later.
Okay, wait. So tell me the story of how you guys met.
So I have a funny mishmash background. I have a BA in dance and a
Okay.
BS in chemistry
Okay.
that I was doing at the same time.
Okay.
And we're 6.5 years apart. So Elliot wasn't in school at the same time, but Albuquerque is the kind of place where it's all 1 degree of separation.
Okay.
So we were like friends on Facebook. We had each other's numbers. How? We have no idea.
Okay.
Just knew of each other, but didn't hang out, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was working on a dance film for a choreography class. And I was like, I don't do this. I don't know anything about editing. I don't know anything about film. I can do the dancing part and that's it, which is like basically a third. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm working on this project. I really need help. Do you think like you have time and would be interested in helping me? And he was like, yeah, I'll do it for free. And I was like, oh, amazing. And then we fell in love and got engaged in 5 months, which is crazy.
Like really fast. It was like
really fast.
that, yeah.
So I was freshly 21 when we got married.
Wow.
This is true.
Which is also insane.
So y'all have been together for a while.
We're going to be married 6 years this year.
Been together
which
for
is
8? Holy
crazy.
shit, dude.
Which is crazy because
That's
when
wild.
I think
That's
about,
wild.
like I was 19 when we met.
Holy
so like
shit.
the
Yeah.
lives that I've lived and the people that I've been,
Right.
that like that's a lot of different people. So it's cool. It's cool to have a partner that has always just like given me the time and space to figure out like what the fuck is going on and who am I and like what do I want to be in this world, and who's always had a desire to like do a thing together. So because we have that like collaborative base, we've always wanted to figure out a way to like build our lives at the same time instead of have 2 separate careers and just be ships passing in the night. So we thought maybe like it could be that, and it could be like dance film. That's a thing. So in the fall of 2019, we put together a collective and we're like, let's apply to an artist residency. And we built this really cool narrative and application and submitted it for an international residency. This is like December 2019. So now here comes 2020. The residency was canceled. Like there was no way that that was going to happen. So we were like, okay, maybe it's not this thing. What about other things? So then in 2021, I was like, what if we start a podcast? I was getting really into vlogging.
Okay.
And I was like, you're a filmmaker. Like you have all this gear. What if we got into vlogging? And Elliot was like, I don't know that I'm really into vlogging. And I was like, okay, what about a podcast? Because a podcast could be faceless. So we bought podcast equipment in 2021 and literally sat on it
Yeah. We
for
weren't
2 years.
Yeah. I don't think we didn't really know what we wanted to talk about at the time, right?
Yeah.
I
And
can't remember why we didn't. We just sat on it for 2 years.
Yeah, we also like we waited to live together until we were married.
We were
Okay.
trying to appease my religious parents.
Of course.
I don't know that I would recommend it. It was very hard. I am deeply messy at heart, and Elliot is very tidy. Like, let me just show you the drawers in the bathroom after
Okay.
this.
Okay.
So we were learning how to live together, learning how to be married. I was still in school, so like I took Friday off to hang out with my bridesmaids. We got married Saturday. Elliot moved in
Dude.
Sunday. I went back to school on Monday.
Well, and you're also getting to know each other. I mean, you have only known each other for 5 months, and
Yeah, we were together like a total of a year and a half. I think a year and 5 months
Okay.
when we were married. So
Okay.
like not that long.
okay.
So our first year of marriage was so hard. Not fun at all. We were not having a good time.
This is true.
And I think it's taken like it really took a lot of time and therapy to figure out how do we collaborate meaningfully together without like fighting and build this life that we've always envisioned. So we really think it took moving to Denver to create that time and space to like birth the idea of something more human.
Okay.
Because we knew no one. Like we don't have family out here. We have like a couple of acquaintances that we know. But we really had to lean on each other and figure out like what are we going to do in this new chapter? Do you have anything to add?
So much.
Okay.
There's just so much to talk about. I'm like, it's funny because you and I are building this thing that really isn't even about us. But I think the reason that the sitting on the equipment became using the equipment was because we've had so many friends and just people we've gotten to know say like that they just appreciate like our forthcomingness and our willingness to talk about all the shit, you know, no matter what. Like that's
Right.
just kind of who Sam and I are, maybe even to a fault.
Uh-huh.
And so we're doing that less because the podcast, I was like, I don't want the podcast to be like a relationship podcast about like love. You know what I mean? Like I don't want
Right.
it to necessarily be about that. Like we want it to be about, you know, community, more community focused. But I think that the power is in our forthcomingness and our willingness to be vulnerable. And so I'm kind of like, I'm not really answering the question, but I'm just like always like torn between like, do we keep going this route that we're going, or do we like go all into like you and I and like who we are as people? Because I think that's kind of what captured people to begin with about us, you know? So, because what I wanted to say was like, you know, it's kind of like come full circle. Like the first year of marriage is really difficult. This year of marriage has been super difficult. And like the last like month has been like terrible, you know? And
it's like a new year of marriage basically, because this is our first year as business partners.
Sure. And I think that has a lot or a little bit to do with it, but I think it also is like my issue with my phone. Like I'm realizing like about life is like these small things, like you were talking about like a mirror for your mother, this relationship with your mother, and you're talking about like being a mirror for people. I think that's who we are as people. Like we're mirrors for the people that we are with. And so I'm a glass half empty guy and she's a glass half full woman, right? And inevitably that glass half empty shit all the time, that energy is going to like infect Sam.
Of
and,
course.
And it has,
right?
You know, and it's taken its toll on Sam. And so I'm like, okay, like what is the problem? Like the problem is that, you know, you're not present enough to be thinking about like, how do I be like the best husband I can be? And why aren't you present enough? Because you're on your phone 7 hours a day. And so like, I think, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but you're asking about like how did things start? And just talking about our marriage and how it's sort of come full circle, and realizing like we have like a duty to be like better for ourselves so that we can be better for each other. And I've never really seen it that way for some reason. Like for many times I've told you like, oh, if I can't be better for myself, like I'll be better for you. That's not the way it works.
Right.
That's just not the way it works.
Right.
You know, like hearing when I was growing up, if you can't love yourself, then you can't love other people. And I always thought that was bullshit, but it's totally true.
You have to.
Totally true.
Yeah. Serve yourself first.
You know, so, but I think that's like the power that you and I have, is like that we're willing to talk about this sort of things, and like how can other people relate to that? Because most people can, because everyone's struggling in their own way.
Right.
And so that's I think the power that you and I possess. And I think that's how we can help people, is by like having those types of conversations and being as relatable as possible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, we recently had Dan Harris on the show, and he was like, I feel like my duty is to say the embarrassing thing out loud. Like that's my job. And I really resonated with that. And I think that you, Elliot, inspire me to be more vulnerable. Like I can fall into just like a sort of type A, like little box if left unattended.
Okay.
And so like practicing, like saying things out loud, because like I said earlier, we all want to be seen.
Right.
So if we say something that's kind of vulnerable or awkward or cringy, like if it feels cringy to the listener, maybe it's not for your ears, but there's somebody who, when people reach out to us and they're like, hey, I listened to this episode, like I feel so inspired by XYZ, we're like, yep, that's totally worth it. Like that feels so good. How do we do more of that? We are kind of like getting lost in the weeds here, but
no, you're not at all. And I think what you said is so important. And that's something that I struggle with sometimes, is sometimes you get so focused on a mission that you have blinders on, and you're not paying attention to maybe things that people are really resonating with that you aren't thinking about, because it's not in like this idea that you have or this goal that you have. And you said it well, where, you know, this could be your power, is you've lived this whole life. You have a very unique story, as everyone does. And people really like when you have these vulnerable conversations, and when you're sharing, you know, your relationship or your journey as a couple or as business partners or separately or together, and those struggles. And yes, your focus is community, but sometimes community is just about feeling seen or feeling validated or feeling related to. So maybe that is a superpower, is like, you know, where you start with your podcast and where you end up with it a couple years from now could look totally different than what you set out, right?
Yeah.
But depending on how people interpret what you're saying, like if you're getting a bunch of DMs about something specific that, or like a bunch of feedback from your friends, like maybe that is something to double down on. It's like, okay, well, you know, if we're okay with being vulnerable, like Dan said, embarrassing stories are what he puts out to the world. Like I feel like that way sometimes, because being vulnerable isn't hard for me. So I don't mind saying hard things because it doesn't bother me. And it helps other people. So I'm totally fine sharing that, you know? And similar to y'all, if you're, you know, comfortable talking about your relationship. I mean, I got dinner last night with a friend, and she was on her way to meet me, and she's like, I need a like extra large strong drink. Like marriage is so fucking hard. Like, and we were just talking, she's been married for a little over a year. And she's a really close friend of mine. So we were like talking about everything. And she was like, God, like I am just ready for, you know, it to just even out for a little bit. Like I just want to be happy for a while and it not be like so fucking hard all the time. Like I know marriage is work, but like it's so much fucking work.
That first year is like underrated.
Yeah.
Like people are like, oh, the honeymoon,
The
like
honeymoon.
it's bliss. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. When we started saying like that first year sucked.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people that were like, oh yeah, the first
Me
year.
too. Yeah.
Like what? How come no one told us that? Or it's
Right.
like when you're pregnant, like you're gonna shit on the table. Like
Yeah.
people
Why don't
just
people
start
talk about that?
Yeah, like people just started talking about that. Like
I know.
how did we not know that before?
Was there a resolution? Was there like a plan of action?
Not quite, but we were just talking about, because I have so many friends that are married, and I'm in a relationship now where like I can get engaged right now. Like I know I'm going to marry him, but like we won't get engaged right now. But so I understand that of like knowing when you know type vibe.
Mm-hmm.
But I've asked so many friends, because most of my friends have lived with their significant other before they've gotten married. And I've always been someone, my parents aren't traditional at all. So like they don't really give a shit. But for me, I was like, I'd like to wait until I'm married to live with someone just so that it feels different. Like something's different when we get married. Since then, I have lived with a guy that I was dating and found out a plethora of things. So I will definitely live with my boyfriend now before I marry him, just because that romantic side of me is like, okay, this is a little more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And when I ask friends, like, what feels different? Like, how's marriage? Like, what's it like now that you guys are already married? So many have said, and her and I talked about this last night, you're married now. Like, if you get in a fight, you're not breaking up. Like, this is it. So there's like a safety in that. But also it's like, holy shit, okay, we have to figure this out, because we're not like, we're a team now and we're more a unit and we're like family. Like we put each other first.
Yeah.
We have to prioritize this. And we were talking about that last night. And she was laughing and she was like, I mean, the fight we got into today, like if we had been dating, like I'd be fucking out the door.
Right.
But like, I'm never going to leave his ass. Like I love him. Like he's my person. And I know that's a season right now, but like the season is just so long. Like I'm just trying to navigate it.
Yeah.
That's real.
And I always appreciate that honesty, because I have so many friends that are the opposite, where they're like, everything is great even when it's not, they won't be. And that's totally fine. Like I don't think everyone's story is to be vulnerable, but I appreciate it as someone that's normally single and like navigating my own relationships of being like, okay, like not everyone's living these perfect lives. And I think anyone appreciates that in a world of social media and highlight reels, like we talked about earlier.
Totally. Yeah, that's a trick with marriage though. It's like we definitely feel that. I think that I wouldn't say our relationship or our marriage or our idea of marriage is like a little more spiritual than most, or religious, but like we really do feel like, okay, like you said, this is it. Like there is no choice but to like make it work.
Right.
To a degree.
Right.
But I also think that that's how people start taking each other for granted, which is like where I think I've been.
Okay.
I would say, I'm not going to speak for you. I don't think you've ever been there, but I think I've been there. It's like, oh, well, we're married. So like, no matter what, not no matter what, obviously.
Right, of course.
But I think that I've been there. And then you obviously, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. And then it starts slipping away a little bit. And so I think that you have a especially like hefty duty to, I don't know, like act like you are, like you could break up at any moment.
Acting like you are
Do
dating.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just so easy to get comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we're married. So like, we're not going to go through all that and shit. We're going through stuff, but it's okay. It's like, well, no, it's not okay. Like it's you need to nip it in the bud now, or it won't be okay. And you will be single. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think for me or for people, like that perspective definitely helps, because I just feel like it's so easy to get complacent in marriage specifically, and not like a relationship, because you can just break up with somebody, no big deal. It's not a problem, you know what I mean? But
it's a little more complicated.
I feel like this is another gray area. Like we talked about the spectrum earlier of how to stop caring what people think. I feel like the spectrum here is, one end is like, oh yeah, we're married, like whatever, and you can get comfortable, and the other end is like, at any cost, I have to make sure like that the other person is good. And the meeting place is sort of like personal development. And if you're committed to being a better person for yourself, you're guaranteed going to show up as a better wife, a better husband, a better friend, a better daughter, a better sister, a better uncle, like whatever the thing is. And that is so underrated and people don't talk about it often enough. But like when I'm investing in myself and when I'm working on the way that I love myself, I'm just showing up a happier, better person in the world.
Right.
Exactly.
And like it can be easy to walk away from relationships, especially friendships, when you're like, oh, well, you're wrong and I'm right. And like, we're not seeing a resolution. So like, I guess you're not meant to be in my life.
Right.
Well, like back to this feedback thing, like, what are we here to do? Like, do I care about you? Do I want you in my life? How am I showing up in a way that makes sense here? And like, let's just be real about how to have a conclusion that makes sense for both of us.
Right.
We learned early on, like, we were fighting to be right. Like, I'm right, you're wrong, here's why.
And that's very common.
And that's not like resolution or team-minded. So how do we now fight
Baby.
for resolution.
Fighting for resolution. Yeah.
And like, how do you do that in friendships too? I think
Mm.
it's interesting because I think that it can be easier to fight in romantic partnerships.
Right.
It's also more normalized.
Yes.
But when we think about friendships, we can be rash, like, oh, we can't be friends anymore. But how do we fight for resolution in our friendships?
And why don't we? Like, why is the default? Like, why is like culture set the default to like? And maybe it's not. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but like, it's just so easier. I feel like, especially for men, to sort of just like not have the difficult conversation, rather sort of let things fizzle out. You know, and I've had that happen so many times. So I guess I'll just speak for myself, but it definitely feels like it's easier to do that. But fighting and having a very difficult conversation in relationships should absolutely be normalized. And I think if it were, people would have, you know, more fulfilling lives and like more fulfilling relationships. Do you know what I mean? It's so hard to fight with a friend, you know, but it's easy to fight with a lover, which is, I guess it makes sense, right? But it shouldn't.
And we're guaranteed to fight. Like, we're humans and we make mistakes and we fail each other all the time. Like, it's okay. But how do we do it meaningfully?
Well, and that's interesting with the friendship piece. I've always had roommates. I've never lived by myself. We're just, I mean, I'm an extrovert and just the cost of it. I don't
Do you have
really wanna
roommates in
pay.
Breck?
I do. I live with 4 girls.
Oh, wow.
So there's 5 of us.
Dang.
Which is quite something. And you'll see our house at some point when you come visit.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of people in a fairly sized house, but you know, 5 girls in a house also, there's, you know, a lot of dynamics.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think I've learned from living with roommates is conflict and resolution, but also like picking and choosing my battles because I can be very confrontational.
Sure.
And I have to think about also, and that's the same in relationships too, you know, if one of my roommates is maybe treating me poorly or being passive aggressive or just not being kind to me, I have to toe the line too of like, okay, well, I know that she's probably really hurting right now and she's going through something, and whatever I'm doing and however I'm living my life or being in a relationship or whatever it is that she feels like she's lacking or feels self-conscious about is why she's kind of like attacking me in this realm. So it's also this line being towed of picking and choosing, like, how do I approach these friendship situations? Because for some reason it is a lot easier to be honest with a partner. Like I've had so many friends when they move in with their boyfriends, they say how much easier it is because they can be honest about the conflict. Like, why don't you put away the dishes? Why are you leaving your laundry out? Why are you leaving the toilet seat up? Whereas I feel like, especially with women, or maybe with men too, I'm not quite sure, because I guess men aren't as apt to like communicate things in general to each other.
That's true.
Like, why aren't we calling each other out on this shit? And why do we feel so much more comfortable doing it in relationships? Because friendships are arguably just as important. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I haven't thought about that, the conflict in it.
Yeah, we've come up with this theme that's like so interesting on the show, which is when in doubt in your friendships, what would you do in a romantic relationship? And like thinking about our friendships through that lens is such an interesting way to shift our perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's just it's like if not you, then who? Honestly, like I think we read The Art of Gathering, we're reading The Art of Gathering, and for some reason it's making me think about like the art of relationships, and it's like your duty and responsibility. Like when you establish a friendship, these are the rules. Like not to be like a boss or not to be, you know, a tyrant, but like these are the rules. Like this is how I believe a friendship will work best.
Right.
Like it's really true. Like maybe even a list, like an agreement. Like do you agree?
Right.
And I know that sounds pretty contrived and like fabricated, but I think that like the intentionality is like how we keep going. Essentially, do you know what I mean? I think that telling people ahead of time, like if I have a problem, like I'm gonna let you know, and like vice versa. If you feel like there's a rift, like it's your job to let me know. Like you need to let me know, or else like this won't work. And so I feel like that's how do we do it? Well, we start with ourselves. We can't start with the world. So like in our relationships, you just do it with your friends. You know what I mean? And so
it goes back to personal development though, right? Like if I come to you and I say like, hey, the way that you've been treating me lately, like feels kind of, you know, mean or feels a certain way and is making me feel a certain way. If I'm not committed to my own like personal growth and I don't care about being a better person, I'm going to be like, that sounds like a you problem.
Right.
So how are we also being open-minded about the feedback, even if it's not great feedback? Like how do we stay open-minded for the betterment of our overall like happiness and like fucking literally longevity of life? Like, there's all this Blue Zone research about, yes, like the food and yes, this, but the culture and the relationships and like the strength in relationships
are what keep people healthy and happy.
Like literally, like living long lives.
Well, I was just thinking like this is kind of what happened yesterday. Like Sam sent me a message and told me kind of how she felt about our relationship and about the way that I was treating her, and it was like if this was a friendship, but even in marriages, like, that there are people that are like, they're so passive aggressive. They don't have these conversations.
Yeah.
So that conversation that Sam told me is in their head, and they let it keep going because they don't want to have the conflict, and then it's done.
Right.
Like, the damage has been done.
Right.
And so, like, the fact that Sam reached out to me so that I could even know to like course correct.
Right.
What would I do without that? Like, we
Right.
probably wouldn't be together.
Right.
You know what I mean? And like, that happens so often, and that's happened in past relationships of mine. I'm sure that's happened in yours. Like, or maybe it hasn't. I don't know. But yeah, I just think it's like a duty. Like, you and I are good at practicing that. Like, we're good at reaching out to each other and letting each other know, like, hey, you're fucking up.
And it does suck. Like, it's not fun, but
No.
like, do the hard thing for like the long-term payoff.
No, I mean, you're inspiring me to have some like tougher conversations with some people in my life. Because I think I've written it off as like, okay, maybe it's not my responsibility to try to make this person see this or try to make this person understand the way that they're making me feel. But I also know they're making other people feel this way. So maybe it is my duty. And it's this like, but is it going to be worth it? Because this is a hard conversation for me to have with them. That's super interesting. And it's also so common in relationships, I think, with men and women, especially where the woman, and I'm not trying to overgeneralize, wants the man to like read their mind almost. It's like, and then the man doesn't realize that they're mad. It's like that age old thing. And then like you act mad and you go to bed mad and the guy's like, wait, what? Are we in a fight? What's wrong? And you're like, well, you haven't done this in a week. And they're like, what? I didn't know. And you're like, well, why didn't you know? Like, I've told you this a million times. And it's that like, that telepathy that doesn't really exist.
Totally.
And so I think it is important to bring that up. And for some reason, it can be hard to, get vulnerable and tell that person like, you're not treating me right, or like, you're making me feel a certain way. And you need that feedback if you want that person to start treating you that way. You can't just expect, because sometimes the expectation is what causes the most deterioration of a relationship and communication, because you're expecting one thing and that person doesn't even know that you're expecting that from them.
Yeah, I would say my number one tip for having hard conversations is like reiterate up front like the intention. Like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about something. It might be a little tough. I'm having this conversation with you because I love you and I want you in my life, or like I really care about this friendship, or like I think you're so amazing and I'm noticing a pattern and I would just love to bring it to your attention because I care, not like, hey, you suck and I want to tell you why.
Totally. Agreed.
And we can, I think
That's
we
easy
can
to do.
Yeah, we can just like fall into that, and it's okay to be defensive. But when we frame it in that way up front and just be super explicit about like, I really care about you. I don't know that we do that super often. So it can kind of create that nice like place to fall into when it's uncomfortable, knowing that you're doing it out of love.
Right.
Right. I think also sometimes though, it's like, unfortunately, but fortunately, because I think it's easy to sort of tell who should be in your life. The reason that you don't is because you're sort of already perceiving the way that this person will respond, because perhaps they're easily offended, or you've seen them react to a different relationship battle, and like, you're just like, there's no way they're going to handle this.
Right.
And to me, that's like, maybe that person's not meant to be in your life. If they're not capable of having that kind of conversation with you, you can't make them do that. Okay. Like, they have to work on themselves. And so I don't know. I'm thinking about that with different people I've known in my life. And it's like, some of those people are not capable. It's not your fault. And yes, it is their fault, but also like, they just aren't there yet. And so maybe it's just like right person, wrong time. But yeah, I think that sometimes maybe we do that because we're perceiving, and maybe sometimes wrongly perceiving, like they're gonna take this a terrible way. Like, there's no way they're not gonna be offended by this.
Right.
There's no way it's not gonna blow up in my face. And if you feel that way, and if you're pretty sure that someone's gonna do that, maybe that's a sign.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I think that comes back to like my thought process of like, is it my responsibility? Is it worth it? Because I've had friends, I've had roommates that I haven't necessarily been like, hey, we're not friends anymore, but I've let it drift rather so, because what I've witnessed, either from the way they speak about other people, the way that they treat me, is like, I don't really know how productive this conversation would be if I had this with you, especially if you're living with a person. Like, there's people I've lived with that made my life borderline miserable, or were like just very micro aggressions. And it's like, okay, you're not a friend to me because you're treating me this way, and I'm aware of that. But also, if I bring this up to you and it doesn't go well, is that going to make my life even worse? Like, we live in the same space, or we're in the same friend group. Like, so how do you navigate that, And sometimes I guess that's what I mean by like picking and choosing my battles, is trying to decide, do I want this person in my life? Do I want to take on this responsibility of teaching this person a lesson? Because I know that people, they come and go. They're not always meant to be in your life forever. There are people that are, there are people that aren't. And something to remember, and that I always remind myself of, especially with like romantic situations, is I'm not always the main character. Sometimes I'm meant to be in someone else's life. Like maybe I was meant to teach them something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know necessarily what purpose they had for me, but maybe they learned something like from their experience with me. And that was all it was meant to be.
Getting little hairs on the back of my neck standing up.
Which is a really hard thing to swallow because I'm very much like you, where I feel like I'm the center of my own universe. Like I want to be the protagonist, and like I always assume, because I think everything has meaning in the universe and all of those things, and everything's connected energetically. So,
do you want to talk about how you're feeling about that?
You can.
Well, I think I think this is more for you. You're the second person to say basically that. And Elliot's been wrestling with like we're talking about, okay, we always want to be better, and like we've come into this marriage agreeing that we're going to push each other to be better.
Okay.
We're going to be better for ourselves, and we're going to push each other to be better. Can we take that same principle into friendships? Like, how are my friends also enriching my life? But what happens if you have a friend that doesn't enrich your life, but you enrich theirs?
And for so long, Sam and I sort of had this thought that like, no, people are meant to be in our lives to enrich our lives. Like we're enriching their lives, but they need essentially to like return the favor.
Right.
That's not true. Like sometimes there are people that are going to take from you.
Right.
And sometimes that's your job. Like sometimes you're the mentee or the mentor. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so someone said that on a podcast that we were on. I shouldn't say someone. Do you remember her name? It's been a while. Anyway, we were on it was a great episode, great show. And she's basically said the exact same thing. And I was like, holy shit. And it sort of changed perspective on like one of my friendships. And I'm like, no, I'm meant to be in this person's life at this time for this particular reason. Like clearly they're looking up to me, you know, for whatever. And I shouldn't be selfishly thinking, okay, well, what can you do for me? Because that's not the way that it works all the time.
Right.
It shouldn't work that way. And if it did, well, I think that's why the world is the way it is, because that's how he operates. Like, what can you do for me? And it's like, well, no, what can I do for this other person? And that's honestly, I mean, that's good for you. Like that clearly that shows that you have something to offer, which is great, you know. And sometimes that's all that you are meant to do for someone is to offer them something, not take anything.
Right.
Or like, do we often undervalue that being of service to someone is actually like fulfilling for ourselves?
Right.
Like, is that the thing that you're getting out of it? And I think I forget that like doing something for someone without expectation also fills my cup.
Right. Well, and just having the recognition of that, of being able to see and take a step back and be like, okay, maybe they're not meant to be in my life, but I'm meant to be in theirs. And seeing that for what it is. And then back to the expectation piece, you're not expecting anything from them, or you just see them for what they are at whatever level they're existing at. And you realize like, okay, maybe I'm not going to learn anything from me, but maybe what I'll learn is that exact experience that we're talking about, that I'm just meant to be in your life, which is a lesson in itself.
Totally.
And still finding meaning.
Amen, sister.
Yeah. Preach.
Mic drop.
If these mics could drop.
Right.
They're too sturdy. And coming back to the relationship piece, and I didn't mean to turn this, into like an advice relationship thing. I'm just so curious.
Yeah.
I mean, being together for this long and through so many phases of life. Because I have friends, I mean, I'm from Alabama, so I have also friends that have been married from a really young age. I have friends that are already divorced. I have friends all over the spectrum. And I'm curious what it's like to grow with someone like that. Because when I think about who I was when I was 19, or even fresh out of college and the people that I've dated, I can't imagine. It was obviously meant for me to wait to get into what was going to be like my end all be all relationship, because I don't think I was really ready. But so many people do meet at such a young age and make it work. And I'm just so curious how it is growing with someone, because there's so many different phases of life and so many people that you are.
Can I punt it to you? Because okay, great.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm ready.
This is my chance to blow smoke up Sam's ass. Sam is the most mature person I've ever met, like in my entire life. Like very emotionally mature.
Okay.
Extremely. Do you not agree? You're just staring at me.
I mean,
it doesn't matter.
I don't.
You don't have a say. It's my.
This is my truth.
It's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at the tears in his eyes. Do you see that?
Well, it's inevitable, you know. I think that 19 is really young, and like sometimes I'm like, you know, thinking about age. I'm like, I was 25, almost 26. No, I was 26. We started dating basically on my birthday.
I am now old. How you old were when we met?
Yeah, so I was 26.
How you old were.
I was 26. You were 19, and then like a few months later, you turned 20. So anyway, yeah, like Sam was very young, but just so mature. And I don't know why I'm starting with that. I think that I can't, like, I was just such a fucking idiot when I was 19 and even when I was 26 and even now. But I think the reason that it worked was because of that piece. I think that Sam was very emotionally mature, very even keel, very disciplined,
Mm.
and she had like a really good structure from dance that just sort of like served her well in like all areas of her life. So it was just very easy to date Sam, first of all, even if sure we did, we're both very fiery people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wait, hold on. Except that the first time Elliot ever saw my house, he was like, I could never date you. And I was like, I didn't ask you to date me.
we were just friends, and I was like, this is
Disgusting.
Okay,
I was
to
like,
be,
that's a weird thing to say, but okay.
to be fair, I wasn't just shitting on Sam. She had 3 roommates that were like,
And we were in college. Like
it
was
was a nightmare. Like her
Uh-huh.
roommates just partied and didn't clean up after the parties.
Uh-huh.
It was like so anyway.
A frat house.
Anyway, but I think that like what Sam said before, I'm not going to toot my own horn, but you said, that I gave you the space to like be yourself and to go through all of these versions of yourself over the last 8 years. But I think also the same thing. Like Sam allowed me to be who I wanted to be. Like we were very well balanced, I feel like, throughout our relationship, even if it was very difficult at times and still is, like, especially like financially. Like there was times where I was the breadwinner and there was times I wanted to take a chance on photography. So like then Sam got a job and she was the breadwinner.
Okay.
I don't even like using that word, but so I just think that there's been really great balance throughout our relationship. And I think 19 years old is really young. 20, 21, getting married that young. I mean, I'm sure so many people have been like, that's too young. Like you should live your life a little bit. But I think because we've given each other that space, we haven't crowded each other. We haven't been like, unfairly overly jealous. We've just sort of allowed each other to discover like ourselves and who we are and give ourselves space to do that, which was much easier for Sam to do than it was for me to do. I think that I had that like jealousy tendency early on from past relationships, but very quickly realized like that, there's no reason for me to be jealous.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's how I can explain it. Because we were both very young, but I think the only reason it worked was because of that balance and of your emotional maturity.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like I'm beating the same drum, but I think it goes back to this commitment to bettering yourself. Like, I feel like relationships in general, like friendship, romantic relationship, whatever, become stale when the person becomes stale. Like when you're stagnant and when you're complacent, like, are you really living your life? And so I think we've always asked ourselves, like, how do we live our life in this season? And because we are collaborative minded in that way, we can go back and forth in what that looks like.
Right.
Like Elliot mentioned, like I was in college when we first got married.
Right.
Like I didn't have a job. Elliot was primarily working and like paying all of our bills. Then I got like my first big girl job, and then Elliot was having his soul sucked by the job that he was at. So I'm like, okay, how do we live our life in this season? Like now I can be the breadwinner, and like how do we go back and forth in ways that are not just for one person, but for like the health of both of us.
Okay.
And that flexibility and collaboration, I think, has been one of the keys to our success.
Yeah, I'm having this epiphany that I've been having over the last couple of weeks, which is like kind of like we talk about reverse engineering life and like even content, right? It's like, for a terrible example, like I want to create a viral clip. So like instead of making the video and hoping it goes viral, like you think about the virality and what would make it viral, and then make, So I think that's happening for our marriage. Like the podcast, I think, I'm not going to say that podcast is the saving grace for our marriage, but I think the podcast has allowed us it's forcing both of us to like not be stagnant. Like we want to make this work. We want this to be the thing that we do for a living. And so like we are sort of forced to constantly level up ourselves, and when we're not, or when I'm not, like when I have not been in the last month or two or whatever it was, ultimately your relationship suffers. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's what that beautiful thing about the podcast is that I'm realizing, I don't want to call it that. The beautiful thing about something more human, about the brand, is that that's kind of what it's doing on its own. You know what I mean? It's serving as like this centerpiece for our relationship. Because now we have like so many, like if we were working 9 to 5s, like we have to be talking to each other. We're doing research. We're bouncing all these like beautiful ideas off each other that are just about conversations. Like we spent time scripting this episode that we're going to have view-ons. Like if we didn't have the podcast, we wouldn't be doing that. We would just probably be sort of doing what a lot of people do, just fine, like watching TV or like going out for food. And we're not doing that. We're forced to speak to each other so often and bounce really cool ideas off each other and take risks. And that's fucking cool.
Do you think that in part is successful because it's grounded in curiosity, like being curious about your partner? Like we're having conversations with each other that we may not just like go to dinner and have.
No, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I think that sometimes we're not curious about each other, but I think that that's where the intentionality comes from. Like yesterday, we decided to like take the "We're Not Really Strangers" card game down to dinner.
Oh, nice.
And I think small things like that really make a difference, because we probably would have had a very average conversation, and that's fine.
Right.
And that's like what this book that I keep talking about, The Art of Gathering, it's like so mind blowing, because it makes you realize like how important every single gathering is, whether that's like at a restaurant or for a birthday party or the podcast or a live recording. Like you have all the autonomy and the responsibility to have this conversation in this meeting to go as well and to go as however you want it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like bringing the card game downstairs, it was a very structured conversation and we asked questions to each other that we've probably never asked each other.
Right.
And ultimately like we learned something about each other.
Right.
And so I think that what I'm trying to say is sometimes we do get stagnant, as everybody does during the day, and like, you know, we're not really curious about each other, but that's a way to be actively curious. That's a way to force yourself to be actively curious. You know what I mean? And so I think it's just small things like that make a big difference. You know, did I answer your question or not really?
Yeah.
Or yours too? Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes you have to inconvenience yourself for those things. And coming back to what you were talking about earlier about time, you know, like you guys are trying to grow this brand, you're trying to grow this podcast and your community, which can also be isolating because you're in reality, you know, on your computer, editing, doing things, researching, all of that, which doesn't always feel conducive, and finding a way to balance that out to be like, oh shit, like it's been 5 days and like we haven't seen anyone but each other. I'm really craving connection elsewhere, but like that would require me to close my laptop early or to be exhausted, but still say yes to plans, or to be intentional and like reach out to someone. And I think that's the same within a relationship. Is sometimes people are resistant to do those things. Like we're not really strangers. For instance, I have made every single guy I've ever even loosely dated do that with me. And at first they're always like, what the fuck is this? Like I usually just get them drunk. I get like a box of wine or something. And I'm like, okay, we're talking about our feelings. And at first they're always really resistant because to them it's like, oh, you think like we have an inability to talk? And it's like, not at all. This is just like questions that we may never even think to ask each other that then leads to even deeper conversation. And like, that's what I love. I love deep, profound conversations. And we talked about this, you know, before for the podcast you're doing with me. You're like, we're just going to skip the small talk shit. And we're just going to get into it. And I feel like I'm the same way. It's like, who has time for that? Let's make something real and let's talk about real things and learn more about each other. And there's still learning to do, even though you've been married for or together for what, 8 years you said? Yeah. And that's so cool though. I love that you're making that choice to be like, no, let's bring this card game and make it a little different than what we do every night, which is have dinner together. Yeah.
Period.
And I think that's how you grow together. So now where you are currently, you know, you've talked about different seasons, different chapters. What would you call this era or this season?
I'm laughing because it's fucking hard. This one's hard.
This is really hard.
Yeah. What would you call it?
Oh man. I don't even know. Ultimate, just like potential. That's such a boring. I'm trying to think of something like super artistic and like, novel. I think it's like old. Like there's so much there's like so much potential. There's so much that we could do that it's kind of overwhelming.
Totally.
But also like time is of the essence at the same time.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is growing pains.
Okay.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah.
Because I think that we're like doing something we've never done before.
Right.
We have a bigger vision than we've ever had for ourselves. And like that shit's hard because it's also going against the idea of like, don't shit where you eat. Like we're married.
We are shitting where we eat every single day.
You're eating it every day.
We're doing all of the things all together all the time.
Yeah.
And like, that's beautiful. And it's very hard. So how are we putting that extra attention and intentionality behind, okay, we've spent all day working together. Now we have to spend time on our marriage and our relationship. And like, that's
switch gears.
That's different.
Yeah. I think we should look retrospectively too, though, right? Like, I'm thinking of that question, like, what's this chapter called? Thinking about like, you're calling it growing pains and I'm calling it unlimited potential because I'm thinking about like right now to the future. But like, if we think back from day one of our relationship or maybe 2021, like we're blessed to be here.
Right.
Like we asked ourselves, like, how can we live life together? Like we're doing that. We're doing that. Like we don't have job. We're not passing in the night, you know, like we have our struggles for sure, but like we're doing this thing together, which is like fucking so cool.
And
so
you're fighting for it.
And we're absolutely fighting for it. So, and that feels, I'm really proud of that. Like there's not a lot of people can say, not that I'm comparing, but like not a lot of people can say that even if they want to, like, I wish I could do that with my partner. It's like, we are doing it, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. Like 2020, I was like, I want to move us to Toronto and I want to go to grad school in Toronto. And I was like, manifesting all of these apartments in Canada and like all the school I was going to. And I was like on LinkedIn chatting with someone in the grad program I wanted to go to. And I had this like very specific vision. And we were kind of like, okay, but how do we make that possible? Like, do we even want to do that? Also, it wasn't possible in 2020. And when we think forward, like the apartment videos I was watching we are living our 2020 manifestation.
Right.
And like, that's crazy.
Right.
Like, that's really cool.
Mhm.
It's not Toronto, but it's a version of it for
Uh-huh.
sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, and that plays into the nostalgia piece of remembering what your goals used to be.
Mhm.
Because I'm guilty of that, where I want everything all at once with my businesses or the things that I'm growing, rather than, appreciating the journey, which of course you do, but it's hard in the moment when you have such bigger dreams. You're like ready to get there already.
Right.
Mhm.
And then it gets overwhelming because, like you said, you have so many things, but you have other parts of your life you need to live, but also time is of the essence, and this like push and pull. And you forget that, in 2021, you bought all this equipment and didn't even know what to do with it. And now look
Yeah.
where you are. So then that's why I love journaling and writing all
Mm.
these things down so that I can see these were my struggles a year ago. And I don't even think about that now. Or like, these are the
Mhm.
things that I was like dying to have. And now I have that, but I'm not even taking a second to appreciate it because I'm already looking to the next thing.
Mhm.
It's so interesting. Humans are so like, we're all different. We're all the same. Like, it's like this weird phenomenon of like, it's obviously very difficult to live in the moment and very difficult to like release attachment to things and like
Right.
attachment of outcomes. And it's impossible to remember everything that's happened before. But you're talking about like, you have these dreams for the brand. It's like, but you also had dreams for the brand back then that you've already hit.
Right.
But now you're like, well, I'm here right now. And,
Yeah.
I already had these other dreams. So I haven't hit
Exactly.
anything. It's like, you've been hitting fucking goals all day.
Exactly.
Every day. And
Exactly.
so it's like, how do we remember that more often?
Mhm.
And I think that you and I do a pretty good job, and you're reminding us, which is great. Yeah, it's like how can we be like content in the moment while also like wanting to strive for like the other things that we don't have. Like how do we be happy with like the process and and not with the result, because there's like the only result was like when you fucking die.
Yeah.
That is, you're not going to arrive somewhere one day you wake up, I did it.
Yeah.
I have all this money, I
Ever.
have all this time. Like that's never ever literally ever going to happen. Even when your wife is pregnant or the baby comes out, like that is, you haven't arrived anywhere.
Yeah.
Like there are so many
So random.
there are so many things that are like still on your mind in that moment, right?
Yes.
It's like I've had the child, but like there's all these other things that are happening that
Yeah.
you're not going to account for when you're thinking about it
Of course.
for the future. And it's like, how do we just
So
be happy
funny.
with today?
I feel like the
You
answer
know?
to that for me is a gratitude practice. Like,
Definitely.
be in regular conversation with yourself about reflecting backwards and forecasting forward,
Mm-hmm.
which it sounds like you do often. Like
Mhm.
I see. you
I try
journaling.
to, but it's so much easier said than done though, because you still get caught up in it.
Yeah.
Totally.
For the homies, dude, the homies watching, like just journal, man.
Yeah.
I journal all the time. And like I think you become smarter. Honestly, like you become a better writer just by journaling a lot, like anything with practice, but also like you learn a lot about yourself.
Mm.
And then it's the time to practice gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's why having a journal that at the top it says, like, I have this journal from Intelligent Change. It's just called the productivity journal. And the first thing for the first day is like, I'm grateful for.
Mm.
So like you can skip it if you want, but like you're going to be thinking about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's pretty fucking cool.
It's
Mhm.
also like when you want to buy a car and then like suddenly you just see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
If you train your mind to see like the small things that are great,
Mhm.
you'll see more of them. And like your life hasn't magically gotten better, but your perception of your life has improved.
Which is all you have.
Exactly.
And that's like a thing, like the way that our brain seeks validation for our thoughts.
Mm.
It's not the other way around. So like if you have a thought, your mind is seeking the external validation that that's true.
Right.
And like we can trick ourselves. And
Oh.
that's cool.
Mm,
Absolutely.
totally.
I mean, I talk about that all the time. My roommates laugh, but I always say that I'm the luckiest girl in the world because everything happens for me.
Mhm.
So then I notice the things that go right and I put so much more weight and value and like energy into those things. But then when
Mhm.
things go wrong, I brush them off more and I don't
Mhm.
notice them as much because I'm so busy thinking about how everything's going right. So if you shift your mindset, you do become the luckiest person in the world because then you notice all the things that are happening for you because it's
Mhm.
already there.
Mhm.
Totally.
And yeah, just tricking your brain really and living a little like delusional world. That's just how I live, or I try to the majority of the time.
Delulu is the Salulu.
It sure is. if
know.
if our listeners learn anything, it's that.
I said that one time on a podcast episode and Elliot was like, where did you get that
What
from?
was that?
And
And
I
I
hear it
was
all
like-
the time.
Yeah,
It's been normalized.
I was like, get with it.
Oh, I mean, my boyfriend is like the least like woo woo he's introspective, but not like I am. Like I'm all
Mhm.
over the place. And now he's saying things like, "Well, the universe, like blah blah blah." And I'm like,
Oh,
"Yeah, bitch,
yeah.
that's right. You've been learning from me."
You're like louder for the people in the back.
I'm like, "Did you just say the universe?"
He's like, oh
He's
shit,
like
I
a Catholic
did.
Alabama boy. I'm like, the fuck? Where'd you
Amazing.
get that from? You know?
Amazing.
Does he live in Breck with you?
He lives in Alabama.
Oh shit.
Mhm.
Okay. Damn.
Long distance.
Yeah.
Let's talk more about that later.
Yeah, we can talk
How long
about
have you
that
guys
on
been
my
together?
podcast. I'll tell you on my
Okay.
podcast.
Wait, on your podcast? We're on your podcast, right?
No, when we do the swap.
Oh, sure.
Uh-huh.
Oh, when you're on
When
ours.
we put you in the hot seat.
Yeah, I can't give any juice on my own.
You're right.
We got to clickbait, right?
Yeah, you have to go to our show.
Yeah, you have to listen if you want to get the inside scoop.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything you want to leave our listeners with? Anything that you're currently working on with one another? Any quotes, any books, any practices? What do we got going on?
The book we mentioned is called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker.
That is in my, I'm ordering that in my brain.
You would think that we
amazing.
have like an agreement. We do not. We just like the book is changing our lives.
That's even better.
Priya Parker, if you hear this and want to sponsor us.
Yeah.
Our
Or
show
come
is
on the
called
podcast.
Something More Human. You can find it on all of your favorite listening platforms, including YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
We love to hang out and chit chat in the DMs. So you can follow us on Instagram, slide into our DMs. Sarah slid into our DMs and look
Sure
at what
did.
happened.
Now I'm in their house.
So
You could be in their house too if you believe in yourself.
We'll have another return to real life event in the near future.
and
Mhm.
We're not
Instagram
sure
is the
when
best
yet,
way
but-
to find out about when, what city, how to get involved.
hmm
Mhm.
I will say, you are an incredible host.
Thank you.
Like I think that this is your calling. I'm not going to. Well, yeah, I am. I guess. No, I think I really do. I feel like I haven't had this. I don't know what it is, but you have like some sort of. I don't know what it is, but this definitely feels magical.
Thank
And
you
I'm actually
so much.
worried that our podcast episode will not be anywhere near
Oh my gosh,
as good as this. Like I
I think it'll
I,
be great.
I feel a little bit because you had a bunch of questions that you gave us,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was literally thinking, I'm like, okay, well, she doesn't have a laptop, so she doesn't have like all those questions. Like, what is she gonna do? And I'm like, holy shit! Like, yeah, I think that you have a gift. This was
Thank
this was very
you.
very encouraging and just a great conversation. And it's also funny what like mics can do, like because I've told you this before, right? Even if you don't have a podcast, if you like, you can create whatever universe you want for yourself. We
Universe.
probably wouldn't have had this exact conversation were it not for like, okay, well now like the context of a podcast is here,
Yes.
and you've already pre-scripted some questions.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
But if you can create that universe for yourself, even if you don't have a podcast, put a mic in front of you and sit someone down. There's a new aura.
I like that.
And so like this conversation that just happened is incredible. So I just wanted to say that you're an incredible host and that you should, I mean, you're already pursuing it, but like I think that this is like
you.
one of your callings for sure. I don't think that I'm this good at hosting.
I think you're an excellent
The questions
host.
have just floated. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be looking at my laptop, asking questions, reading from a prompt sometimes, but it's just different.
I'm excited. You guys have been so phenomenal. I mean, I've had so many guests on, but this just flowed so naturally. And I'm a very curious person, but so are you too, obviously. And so I think that's one of the pillars of being a host is just being present in conversations, because I only send those questions so that the guest knows that I'm not just showing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I never look at them when I'm interviewing, because I'd rather not get distracted by like, I have to ask this certain question. So I'm going to try to steer the conversation this way.
Sure.
I didn't know what we were going to talk about today, and
Mhm.
look at all the beautiful conversations we've had and some tears,
Yeah, it's fair.
which we love.
I love
Yeah.
it.
But no, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
For sure.
Thanks,
We
Sarah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you guys so much for listening. Check me out now on Something More Human podcast. We're going to do a little swap and have a smoothie break, and see you guys next week.
Sweet.
Bye.
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 All right, and that is a wrap on this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Follow along with their podcast, as well as check out the podcast that I recorded for them. We get into it, and it was absolutely phenomenal. If you're new to the podcast, you can follow us at Raw Intentions Podcast on Instagram. We drop new episodes every single Thursday, anywhere you get your podcasts. If you love us as much as we love you, we would love if you'd leave us a little like, rating, or review. It just helps us as we continue to grow our little community. And if you want to chat, slide into our DMs. I love hearing from you guys. If you want to talk about something you heard on the podcast, something you'd like to hear, something you'd like us to have on, always all ears and always love hearing from you guys. That's all I got this week. Have a fabulous weekend. Thank you so much. Hugs and kisses. And I will talk to y'all next week. See ya.